call this meeting to order at 5:31 p.m. We will go over roll call. So Bjorn is here, Judy, Joffrey, Naif, Rehan, and then no word from Sean or Greg or Fung. Still unsure about Andrea, but Stephanie will be here around 10 minutes late. So, okay, we can move on to the agenda approval. So if everyone has looked at that, is there any discussion on it?
Motion to approve.
Okay, motion to approve the agenda by Judy. And I see a second from Bjorn. All those in favor? All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes 5-0-0. And I do see Sean connecting. So we can move on to the approval of last week's minutes. If you all had a look at that. Is there any discussion?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Judy. And is there a second? Seconded by Bjorn. Okay, all those in favor of approving last week's minutes? All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes now 6-0-0. So now we can move forward with the reports. I do not have any, so we can transition to advisory reports.
I do not have any reports today.
I have two. One is just an update. Our program reviews, as a reminder that we sent out to all the base funded units that are due right before we go to spring break. So in March, we have already started receiving them. And so I wanted to say thank you to Theater Arts, who submitted their program review last Friday, a whole month in advance. And so those will come in once we get them all. We'll make sure to send them out to you all as the committee, and then we'll have them posted on the website for review as well. That'll be stuff we'll do spring quarter, but wanted you to know Theater Arts turned theirs in. Good job for them, and they're starting to come in. The only other report I have is just as an update. You all got an email on this last week, but just also wanted to point out that this will be Haley's last meeting with us. So thank you, Haley, for all your hard work the last 2 quarters. We appreciate it. But she is on to different things. You're more than welcome to join us on Wednesday nights. They're open meetings. If you miss us, feel free to pop in, but we will miss you here as the secretary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Joffrey, do you have any reports?
Yes, the BOD, they have updated the resolution. I hope you all got a copy, and I hope tonight we get into the in-depth discussion concerning the progress of it.
Thank you, Joffrey. Now we can move along to other business with communications received and the CWU S&A resolution that's been updated.
Yep, and so you all got that from Haley this morning. My days this week are blurring together. It'd be a short week. Yeah, this morning. And so ACW did update the resolution as we let you all know last week. You can see the updated and final one in your emails. We'll have it posted on the website for others to be able to see later on. Really, there's a few tweaks and things, all things we talked about last week. But most, if not all of this, you'll see incorporated into our discussion here in just a moment on the updates to the S&A policy. So I don't know if there, I mean, other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I don't know if there's other questions from anyone specific on this before we get into the policy recommendations, though.
Thank you, Joey. And I don't think there are any questions. Let me check the chat or the real quick. Yeah, no questions. So we can move forward with the agenda. There's no public or sorry, there is public comment. First call for public comment. Seeing no public comment, there is no new business in the agenda, so we can move to old business with the subcommittee and the policy draft.
Thank you. So you also got this sent out this morning and hopefully a chance to look over it. So the subcommittee, again, as we've been giving the updates the last 2 weeks, we've been meeting regularly to touch base. Some of this is based on the resolution and recommendations from ASCWU. Sorry, my dog is in the background wanting to join. And some of this is based on the committee, each of us, or the subcommittee, reviewing and making some recommendations. Just so you all know, for process, this is really for us to discuss, ask questions, provide feedback on this week, and then determine what there's a few key points the subcommittee wanted the overall group to discuss and make a decision on. We'll make a motion, ideally, someone will make a motion next week. So that way, any additional thoughts, if any of you need to bring this back to constituent groups, you can. And then we'll vote to move forward the policy with whatever other edits at next week's meeting. So this is really to discuss, iron out any last details with that. Before I kind of go through the updates a little bit line by line that we did, are there any questions about the process or what comes next with it?
I had a question about potentially like abstentions. At least for myself, like I work for student government under the Multicultural Affairs Office. So will I need to abstain from voting?
Not on the overall piece of it. The only part is if there's a part that would be specific to student government or benefit it, knowing that this is just the procedures and that at least as it stands right now, Judy, there's nothing in here that would be a direct tie or benefit to that office. You don't have to. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, awesome. Like they're just proposing it, so it's fine.
Yep. Great question, though. I appreciate you checking.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Any others? Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and you all can see it, and I'm not going to touch on every single one, but there's a few that I want to highlight that the committee had some questions, or the subcommittee had some questions on to get feedback. I'll go through kind of overall what we did as updates and then jump back to those. The ones that are really intended for discussion, you'll see have comments on the side, either because there's a point that we wanted to bring up or to see if there's any additional recommendations from the overall body. As we go through it, though, I'll go through the whole thing at once and then jump back. The updates that we made were really under the committee structure to the student membership piece of it. This is tied directly to the recommendations and resolution from ASCWU. And so you'll kind of see that on there, the update of the student positions, specifically the number, as well as the updates to the faculty and administrative position to say non-voting, again, in response to the resolution from ASCWU. There's a few questions in here that I know we're going to want to discuss as a committee here in a minute, but I'll keep jumping through this. There was some addition under the academic standing requirement for the student members, just so it's clear on what the process is for student members who fall below the good academic standing. It's the practice, but it's not clear in procedure, so wanted that to be put in there. We also put in, because under the committee officers, so if you go under section A6, where it says committee officers, it listed out the officers, but did not delineate what the responsibilities of the position were. And so wanted to be clear in the procedures. And again, in a basic, we didn't go into super depth of it, but an overview that we covered during training to put that in there. As you'll keep looking, we made a few other slight tweaks just to language that you'll see, nothing really substantial. We did want to include, and so this is a great segue with your question about conflicts of interest, Judy. Under the conflict of interest, it had already said that members who have a conflict of interest will abstain from voting, but may participate in the committee's discussion in the same capacity as members of the general public. We wanted to be more clear because members of the general public, as you all know, can participate via public comment or if called upon to answer a question. Given practice in the past, we want to be more clear here because we have had members who have abstained from voting, but who have been more actively engaged in the discussion than should have been. So you'll see that there. There's a question that we'll come back to under for members' attendance, specifically excused absences, on whether there is any desire or need to put a limit or a piece on there. There is for unexcused absences. You'll see again language updating away from campus to university, because again, this is beyond one campus. Some conversation, and when we come back to it, I'll let Bjorn add in there and kind of give the piece. When we talk about budget proposals, we have a little bit under that of justification, referencing section 2A3, as well as all of them will be evaluated in accordance with how they benefit CWU students. We left it as that as a subcommittee, but there was some discussion giving some comments that came up at base funding last year. As you'll go on under solicitation, we took out the specifics of the notice, and this is for base funding, where it says a notice will be published in the first issue of the Observer, and wanted to be more general in case that name changes, or if there anything else to say the university's official student newspaper, as well as adding what we already do in practice, that notice is sent out via email to all base funding units. Updated under the administrative review to be more general, knowing that there's some changes happening at the administration with structure and routing. Supplemental request, if you go down, and this is on page 5, E1, is really adding in there, and this is a piece the subcommittee had some discussion on, and really wanted to be intentional that supplemental requests are more clearly defined in here, that they're really intended for base funded units to come in and request. And so we put in there, and it's already somewhat referenced, but it's not as direct. And so really putting it more clearly that the committee recognizes that base funding units may have things that come up, and base funding units may make funding requests outside of the base funding allocation, to be clear. I think, as you all know, supplemental requests are really going to be different for the next little bit of time, for the next couple of years, because of just the budget situation that we're in. So thought this would be a good time to make this more clear in the policy, as we're already making some of those other changes. And then the last part is, if you really come down under the very last, under amendments, the S&A committee review, given the proposed changes to voting members really being only students, under the committee review, we changed the structure to go that any subcommittees consist of, and it said 3 students, but we said at least 3 students, and remove the faculty and administrative member requirement part of that from the subcommittees, just again to be consistent with practice, but also with the updates to the voting member part. So with all of that, I'll go back to the ones where there were some questions from the subcommittee, and then kind of open it either to general questions or feedback. The spots that you'll see on there, and again, there's really 4, but I'll say 5 points of discussion that the subcommittee wanted to pass along. And you'll see them in the comments. The first one is under the student membership. ACW recommended moving from 9 to 13 student members, and there was question that had come up at our subcommittee meeting on whether 13 is really going to be a reasonable number to be able to fill, given historical pieces of trying to fill this committee, with the 8 and the 1 being ASCW exec VP. The other one is there was some question under the student representation where it says so far as practicable. There should be student representation from each of the colleges, non-traditional resident or student who resides on campus, and representation from the centers. There was some question and request for maybe some different wording of the so far as practicable. The committee really didn't come up with a subcommittee a better wording of that, so left that open for you all as well. You'll see down there under the administrative member, I know in our discussion, and Joffrey can share on this in a minute, ACW didn't necessarily want to remove faculty from the committee just as voting members, and so to have them as non-voting, the question really was under the administrative member, whether the intent was still to keep a non-voting administrative member appointed by the president or not. especially given the president elected not to do that this year, and knowing that we already have 2 advisors who are appointed who are administrative members. So wanted to have that be a discussion point as we move it up. I already mentioned the excused absences, whether we wanted to say something along the lines of excused absences require prior notice. Any member who misses more than half the number of meetings in a quarter or more may be removed, or leave it as it is. And then again, Bjorn can give some pieces under the request, but do we want to add more details under evaluation? We're not going to go into detail on a whole rubric of criteria necessarily, just so people are clear, but is there something more we want to say about the evaluation part beyond the section 2A3 and we're going to benefit all students? So with that, are there any questions in general, or do we want to jump straight to the first topic about the 13 voting student members? I'll kind of turn it over. That's everything I have to present. Or any subcommittee members, anything in additional that I missed or you wanted to highlight on there? I tried to be as concise as I could. I see none of them unmuting. But I do want to say thank you to Stephanie Beard and Joffrey for serving on the subcommittee with that. They can help answer any questions you all may have. But with that, I think I'll just jump to the first one for the committee to discuss. If we are going to move to only students as voting members, again, the ASCW put in the request to move the 13 voting members to be all students, and so to increase from 9 to 13 where we stand. My question to you all, and this is also to you, Joffrey, as the ACW, but also as Executive VP, is really, is that a reasonable amount? Because my concern, and I don't know how that went this year, is how many people do we really have that applied? Because I can tell you in past years, we have not had an abundance of people beyond the 8 open positions. In fact, we normally have less. And the Exec VP, it essentially delays our ability to start the academic year because we've almost every year had the Exec VP still trying to find people to fill those positions. And so I appreciate the idea of 13 as us having more student voice. My concern is that really a reasonable amount? Because this committee has to start business typically the very beginning of October, and it gets delayed until we can fill all those positions. Thoughts, questions, feedback from others?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Judy. I was just going to say I saw your hand raised first.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, maybe we could just have like a minimum maximum, because I feel like we do have to have like a minimum number of people to really discuss these topics in depth with adequate representation. But it is good to have, like, I think 13 is a good number if we did have that drive. So, you know, if we had that number of students, I think that is a good number. So I think we should have that number of positions, but then just have a minimum to start business in the fall. And I feel like, yeah, and that kind of goes hand in hand with getting them from each college. And then, I mean, once we have those specific representation, like those specifically allocated spots for specific types of representation, then we can kind of know where to, like, basically, you know, contact professors, departments to talk about S&A and say, hey, we need somebody to represent our college. So I don't know. I think that because we have the allocated representation, I think we'll have increased numbers of students coming to represent it, because they'll have more of an idea of like a purpose of like coming here and like who they're representing, why they're here, all of that. And I think that, I don't know, I think that that'll become less of an issue. That's just my theory. But yeah, so I support it.
Go ahead, Joffrey.
From my personal experience this year, I don't know whether I've just been lucky a little bit or whatever, but even up to the end of spring quarter, there were students still really wanting to serve on S&A, and I have had to email them and tell them that the committee is filled already. And so I do not think the question of whether or not we're going to get students is very important. I think the thing here is the way we create awareness concerning S&A and the way we really let students be informed on the priority of S&A and how well, you know, we let students know on the idea of the accountability, I think is what is really important here. And you know, if you talk to different students concerning, you know, being a part of a committee like this, you know, they are, well, I think, you know, they really want to be a part of this discussion on how this money is really spent, you know, and I do not, you know, I think it's very possible, or it's even very viable, that you can even get up to, you maybe even 20 students, you know, if the spot permits, you know. I think it's very possible that we can get students, and again, the question is, how well can we tailor the awareness and discussion concerning S&A, make it really known to the students? I think that is the ultimate question here. Did I confuse everybody, or did I? Okay.
Nope, I was just waiting, Joffrey, to see if there's any additional or any thoughts on the other side of it. We can put in there something along the lines of what Judy said. I will tell you all procedurally, the challenge becomes, if we have 13 voting members, we have to have 6 for quorum. And if you only appoint 6, everyone has to be present for every meeting, because our quorum is based on the number that's in the policy. Unless there are things that come up, right? The president decides not to fill something and we put it into policy or procedure. So I think that's the only part from a business standpoint of us being able to move forward, is if you have 13 positions, but people don't show up or don't apply, then you get that diffusion of responsibility.
Yeah, the point Judy put is pretty good. Putting a minimum number and putting a maximum number is good, you know. But also at the end of the day, you know, again, the question is, you know, is the next VP going to put another effort into creating that awareness, you know, just for the fact that they want to create that, want to get that minimum number, you know, is that one question too. And at the end of the day, you know, I think it's better if we have a definitive number on really, you know, the actual numbers of students needed on this committee. And on quorum, you know, I don't know, you know, how the number for the quorum is set up, but at the end of the day, you know, you can put it, you know, maybe 7/13 is still a good number, or 9/13, whichever. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally see Joey's concern with quorum, because that can be like really frustrating when you know, like your minimum is, yeah, no, I definitely see that as being an issue. But I think honestly, if we make our next order of business, like basically I don't want to call it like a publicity package, but you know, something like that, like just a, you know, some framework on how we're going to increase our visibility and like create like more of a framework for students to see like how they can represent their college, or like, you know, non-trad, or like any, you know, whichever identity that they're representing. I think that could be, as long as we have that framework in place to increase that visibility, increase people's awareness of S&A, and increase interest, I think we should be fine. And then also just like creating documents so that it, you know, continuity isn't as much of an issue. There's something for reference for the next set of committee members. So I think as long as we document it well, I think that we should be all right.
Go ahead, Bjorn.
I'm definitely on board with Judy's suggestion of like publicity stuff to help supplement the increased committee membership. The question that I had actually came to me last night when I should have been sleeping. Was basically, I am kind of questioning the rationale of doing representation from the 4 colleges, because S&A is almost exclusively co-curricular or mostly extracurricular, so it's not as pertains to the colleges. It's more like the positions like on campus center students seem a little more applicable to S&A's scope. It is kind of late in the game, and I know that's kind of typical for me, but it seemed like something that we might want to evaluate. And if we evaluate what positions we want to have on the committee, that could also help us find a concrete number of people that we want to have on the committee, potentially, maybe.
Bjorn, the part I agree with your point, and I appreciate you bringing up that the academic having representation from each academic colleges does seem like an odd one specifically for S&A, because the funding cannot be tied to curricular, and there's that separation that's so often there. I think that's part of the conversation we had with ASCWU, because if you remember, their initial resolution had it more closely tied. This was what was already written into the policy and procedures from before, which I think was with the intent of just having a diversity of student representation. But you bring up a great point, that is the intent of having a diversity of students, not from one necessarily area, but having the written representation from the different colleges. Does seem like an odd one for S&A. I wouldn't, my only caution for you all is I wouldn't get too specific into what those are, because that could shift and change depending on the makeup of our students, what we're looking for. I think that's really something that I think ASCWU should be specifically looking at. What type of representation do we want to have? Because that could change from year to year. But I think that's a good point within it. I don't know if there's a better suggestion right now to have some of that.
We could have it just stated, like you're saying, like just like a diverse set of identities, a diverse group like representing S&A, and then kind of have it as more like kind of informal, knowing that could be like maybe probably just kind of, it's hard because I feel like with continuity and things like that, I feel like it could be difficult to keep it informal without because then you're not documenting. But yeah, some sort of in between I think could be worked out.
I know I don't have a vote on this, but I will tell you, I think it's extremely important no matter what, and we can keep it as it is right now. This is also something, as you all think, before we vote next week, if there's something there. I think the important part for me is really, especially knowing our student makeup and demographic, is having the representation of the university centers, because university center students pay the S&A fee. And so that's always been a challenging dynamic if they're not represented on the committee. As well as honestly non-traditional students, because that is a different student population, and we do have a very large non-traditional student population across our areas. And so those, to me, in terms of diversity of students, are two key areas that, if you look at what our student body is, makes sense in a general sense. And then I know the representation who reside on campus is really with the Ellensburg campus being a residential campus. That's a very different focus within those as well. But again, something for individuals to think about on that. The other one, and we don't necessarily need to discuss, because honestly, this is going to be a verbiage piece of us going back and forth. If there is recommendations or thoughts on different language when we say so far as practicable, what that's really saying is for ASCWU, the intent should be to get diverse representation from the areas that might be there as much as is possible, but not essentially if you get 13 students who all apply and are willing to be here, and you can get absolutely no one who resides on campus. You try your best to do that, but you can still fill that position with another one. So that's what it means by so far as practicable. I know there's multiple questions or hands.
Bjorn, go ahead, and then Judy.
Yeah, I just put as an option, a potential option, kind of a legalese option in the chat if it's worthwhile. The other question I had was kind of, this is like regarding representation. It just occurred to me, can there be redundancies? Like I would theoretically count for College of Arts and Humanities, College of Education and Professional Studies, and non-traditional student because I'm history education and online. I just wasn't sure how that would work out.
That's really why, I mean, to answer your question, it's not a set, like there's one position for non-traditional, there's one for this, because it really is intended to have diverse pieces. And so ideally, you are going to have students like you who have those different aspects of it. It's really that we wouldn't want a committee made up of 9 students who are all history education majors and online, right? That would not be a diverse representation of our student body and experience. as much as a former history, social studies, education major as well, it helps to have varying opinions.
Right. And then my question was, is the definition and kind of like context around like practicable, is that like outlined and defined, or is that like an informal definition?
It's not defined in the policy, but I mean, it is defined when you look at it. It really is a policy word, is what it is. I mean, you can look up the definition, but it's really, as much as it's able to be done or put into practice or procedure successfully, is how it is. And so it is a technical term that is used in some policies and some legal pieces, to use as few words as possible in the document, as possible. But yeah, we don't define it in our policy itself.
Right. Yeah. I just feel like with any like context specific definitions that might not be like, you know.
I have had a problem with that phrase for a long time. It's one of those phrases that are really, doesn't sit well. I think it brings shortfall to representation, and really it's one of those that are, for as far as practicable. I mean, think about it. One can only do what they can, right? Without doing a bigger effort making it work. And also, I think representation is a big deal. It's not just a big deal. It entails the verbiage you use in order to make it work. And I think if you use the phrase for as far as practicable, it doesn't mean anything. It's only there as a phrase, but it's really not definitive enough to help create representation on campus. That's why I have had a big problem with it.
Yeah, I think it sort of dismisses like the like explanation as to why, right? Like we're completely capable of making sure that this committee is known, throughout campus. We're capable of making sure that students know what we do and what their role could be as a committee member. And I think that we have like an obligation to like make sure that that information is out there to the furthest extent, rather than literally have wording in our governing documents that dismisses, the effectiveness of it.
Bjorn?
I would definitely also push for stronger language. I mean, I think the one that I put in the chat is, well, I guess I should read it. Unless maintaining such would jeopardize filling the committee. That sounds kind of legalese, and I could have phrased it a lot better, but I think we need that kind of strong language where if it is physically impossible, or like mostly impossible to fill the committee or have a working committee without, bending these requirements, but so far as practical, never mind, does allow it allows a lot more leeway than listing a specific condition under which we can bend the rules.
I'm taking down notes. If you all think of others, we'll throw some stuff in there. The one that I know is going to be some discussion is so going down, again, when we get to the faculty representation and the administrative representation on there, following really just what was put in by ASCWU was to leave those as they were with the number and that, other than changing it to non-voting. I guess my question for the committee is, both under the faculty in terms of the three, and this is where I know Greg's not here, and so it puts Sean potentially on the spot as our only faculty one here. Is 3 really a reasonable number of faculty to have serving on the committee if they're non-voting? And administrative member, is that something we want to keep as one non-voting administrative member, or remove that entirely given they're not voting and we have 2 administrative advisors? So those are 2 pieces wherever you all want to jump in at.
Bjorn?
I think it might also depend on what role we set for the faculty as non-voting members. Because like if they're supposed to be liaisons with the faculty senate to communicate the faculty senate's opinion, then that could potentially require more members than just supposed to report, like a reporter for the faculty senate kind of position. So I feel like it might be worthwhile codifying what the faculty are supposed to do before we decide how many. Same with the administrative member, if the administrative member is retained as non-voting.
Judy?
Yeah, I agree with Bjorn. I think that it's important, like for continuity purposes, right? Faculty are here for generally a longer time than students, and their opinions can be really, you know, a great way to have insight into like things that students, just based on their experiences, might not see when like making decisions, you know, on this committee. And so I do think that they should be like not necessarily like a specifically noted as an advisor, but in an advisory role. They should still be included on this committee, like for sure. It's just that bottom line is they don't pay the fee, you know, like it's not going to directly affect their you know, experience as students because they're not students, right? But their opinions are greatly valued, and they, you know, they need to be brought to the students' attention to understand the full scope of their decision. But it is a student decision because it is student dollars.
I think to answer some of the questions, what both of those roles are, I mean, and again, I'm speaking from how they currently stand, because they are voting members, is really, again, it's not to provide the historical perspective or the policy advice pieces. Those are, again, under the advisors. Whereas you both know Lacey and I have similar but different areas of where we focus on those. Really what it is to provide the perspective and opinion from a faculty member within their role of the university, or an administrator. That's where the administrator becomes a little bit different, knowing they're not voting and so shouldn't be influencing the outcomes, which is kind of where the question is, knowing we already have administrators who are here. I mean, right now you have Greg, Lacey, and myself, who are all administrators and who don't vote within it. So the faculty in a non-voting piece would really be there for discussion pieces to provide perspective from the academic side as we talk about the funding. Now, this kind of goes back a little bit to what you said earlier, Bjorn. It's also, this funding is not tied to curricular pieces, and so there is a little bit of that context within it. But from a role standpoint, that's where they are. Sean, you can correct me, but really, there's not a regular report back to faculty senate on here's what we're doing. It's really to just provide that lens and perspective.
Yeah, so because typically even in, oh, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Lacey, go ahead.
No, please, Sean, go ahead.
Deanna, I didn't mean to take the power away from you. My apologies. So typically, like even when we're in department meetings or college meetings or faculty senate, there are other faculty members that will report on the committees that they're a part of. I am never asked to do that as part of even the S&A budget committee. And so that's literally just something that we, truthfully, me being here week to week is pretty much all it is. And then when I'm talking with people, they'll ask me about it, but it's not any kind of official report that happens. I think the only thing, and I'm not trying to rock any boats, if you move faculty to non-voting positions, I think we mentioned this before, in terms of a service perspective on our side, a weekly meeting is quite a bit, right? Like there are other committees where they might even meet only once a quarter or twice a year. So if you move it to non-voting, I guess my only concern would be having faculty be there every week. I think would be a valid concern. I mean, you know, everybody has a lot of stuff going on, but if you tell somebody that you have to be at the meeting, but you're not voting, you know, what kind of skin in the game is there? And I know there's abstentions and different things, but it's just something to think about. Not that, you know, all faculty members are awesome like me, but maybe there's some that aren't. I'm just kidding, of course, but you do want the faculty members that are part of it to participate and to help out too. So just something to think about there.
Go ahead, Lacey.
So a couple of things that well, maybe questions that I want to kind of piggyback off of the last couple of comments is Sean brought up a couple of comments of like the frequency of meetings. And so looking through some of these changes, if the S&A committee does only see base funded areas for supplemental, which I realize is later down in the policy, but referencing that, I think it does tie to what is the intent behind the votes that are sitting at the committee, and how frequent do we need to meet? So for example, historically, base funded departments can come in once a year, maybe twice a year, depending on the situation for those base funded departments. So there wouldn't be necessarily a need to review that every single week. And then the other piece of it is the majority of the funding is actually awarded to base funded departments that are within student success. And so if we have faculty that are advising, so like, let's just say the 3 faculty positions advising, I'm not sure if that's the best kind of outside advisor, outside of the advising roles that Joey and I use, would make a lot of sense to me. And I guess that's the question that I'm kind of proposing to the committee, is that since the majority of these funds are actually outside of the classroom, outside of faculty kind of discretion in some of that, does it make sense for them to be advising on that? Or would it make sense for maybe one of those roles to be more student affairs focused or student activity kind of focused on that base?
Great questions. I can see everyone thinking. Anyone else with any response to that or thoughts and feedback? I think that's a great point, as we talked about, with it being outside of the curricular piece, and as you talked about where the base funding units fall.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Bjorn, I didn't raise my hand.
No, it's okay.
Okay. I wanted to respond kind of to with there being kind of no incentive, for lack of a better term, to attend weekly meetings. I mean, like my only concern with continuing the meetings was making sure that we had that area for public comment. So even if we don't cover anything, like there's still an opportunity for public comment, because I do think that that's valuable. And this committee is like we need, I think that it's good to keep that sort of avenue open. But I also do think that if we created some sort of process for people who have public comment to give notice, right? And that way we can like sort of not have these meetings weekly if we have no business, but we also know that we're not taking away like the floor from somebody who needs to like come to our meetings and say something during public comment. I think that creating a process like that would then make it so that we can, in good conscience, sort of not have these meetings weekly and not, come in for 10 minutes, right? I think that could be totally valuable. I think we just need to put a process in place so that maybe like, up until the night before, people can, upload, hey, I want to come and talk during public comments. And then we can just bring in any sort of faculty perspectives and things like that during voting meetings and things like that, where we need those perspectives.
Bjorn, did you still have your hand waved?
Well, I was deferring to you because just to keep continuity of discussion.
Oh, the only part I was going to say, and I was going to wait after, so don't lose your thought, Bjorn, is just really, I think what Judy brought up is a good point. We're not updating the policy to say, and the policy doesn't say how frequently we meet. It really says the committee at the start of the year will determine our meeting frequency. I will say the challenge is going to be that they're definitely, with the proposed, looking at our procedures and things and knowing what the work we put in this year, right, isn't going to necessarily need to be done next year because we've already established it and it's not a base funding year. And so they may meet more infrequently next year. However, when we get to a base funding year, at least for the first 2 quarters, there will likely need to be weekly or close to weekly meetings. And so it's hard to say right now, but just from that perspective. Go ahead, Bjorn.
Yeah, I was kind of, oh, I don't need to raise my hand. In terms of, Lacey posed a question, I was if theoretically student success members were brought in as ex officio non-voting members, would they, given that I guess a majority of S&A allocation goes to student success, would they be asked to, you know, like refrain from discussion in anything related to student success? Or because in the same way that a faculty member might be asked to refrain from discussion if it were somehow related to their purview, probably co-curricular, but.
Yeah, so I think it kind of depends potentially on who the person might be, but I would say student success is a pretty large division. And I think that there probably could be someone, and Greg's here, but like potentially have someone that is basically, there's no conflict of interest, so they wouldn't have a base funded area. And I say that because I think from a student affairs standpoint, even if they're not directly working with a base funded area or, you know, within that department, they're going to have a really good knowledge base of how the student activities plays a part. And so I guess that's the long-winded way of saying, I think there's enough people to find someone that would have limited conflict of interest and that could provide some context to how the whole operation works. Greg, do you want to have anything to add to that?
Yeah, if I may, you know, Bjorn, I think you bring up an interesting point. And you know, S&A is a committee that reports to me in my role as a Dean of Student Success. I don't have to be at these meetings because I've delegated that responsibility to Joey and Lacey as a financial advisor and a program advisor, because they don't have the level of vested interest in Joey's area as the executive director of student rights and responsibilities. Doesn't receive S&A funding. So he can, I think, effectively advise and provide perspective and kind of challenge the group in a way that he doesn't have this vested interest. Where you probably notice I'm pretty quiet in these meetings, and I think it's important for me to be quiet in these meetings and just listen and reflect on where our students are at. Because when I have to make difficult budget decisions in reference to how are we being good stewards of your resources from a student success standpoint, I need to do that in a way that's balanced and equitable. And to me, it's easier to listen to the conversation, not necessarily participate in it, but listen, so I can understand what students are thinking and what you value, and then align that with the resources that we have available within student success. So, you know, that's the approach that I've taken. I see it as this is your committee. This is, you know, your decision, your opinions, your perspective, your vote. I need to honor that, and I need to make it work and operationalize it beyond that. So for me, you know, that's why we kind of have the structure that we have, and I think it works with Joey and Lacey in those roles, and that's why I'm a relatively silent partner because of that. If that helps, you know. I do feel, you know, I need to speak at PBAC or at the budget committee when things come up, because I'm going to get that question, or Lacey's going to get that question. And so we need to be informed enough to provide that perspective if and when it comes up. And it does periodically come up, of help us understand why the students voted on this, or why the students want that, or why they're not distributing any resources to these types of groups right now. I mean, it's an important perspective to have, to kind of serve as that advocate on behalf of students, which is my role as a dean.
Fear.
I don't know if parliamentary procedure has the provisions to allow like responses, but yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I did kind of wonder why, if you didn't have to be here, why you were here, but I always appreciated it. I think that is a really good structure to have, you know, non-vested interests as advisory roles. Didn't even occur to me, which seems to indicate, I think, that potentially, I mean, I'm sure there are other positions in student success that are like non-vested interest in S&A, but it seems, I mean, if we were to add one of those, I certainly wouldn't be opposed. But it seems to me that faculty also serve those non-vested interest roles. Yeah. Faculty, especially since a lot doesn't pertain to the curricular side, provide another set of good advisors. Granted, most faculty don't work with student success very much, so like there's a different perspective, but kind of thinking out loud here.
Seeing nothing else on this one, I'm going to jump to the next, which hopefully will be super short. If you jump down to the other point for feedback, under excused absences, so if you go to attendance, and this is talking about all committee members are expected to attend meetings, as you all know, as we were talking about earlier, we have to have quorum, right? And so it's important, especially when there's budget pieces being decided and voted on, that people are present. We previously kind of had it separated into these two, the excused absences, and define what excused absence is, because that was not there. And that really for unexcused absences, that any committee member with more than 2 unexcused for the whole year can be removed from the committee. There's not a piece for excused absences. And so that kind of came up. And I don't know if you want to add anything else, Stephanie, I need to put the question, but do we want to put a limit in there? Or do we want to keep it there? We haven't had a situation necessarily where it's become an issue in the past. It could, right? If someone every week is like, nope, can't make it, can't make it, can't make it. And then that's a position that we would probably have a conversation, but there's not an ability to remove them within that. So is there anything more you want to add to that, Stephanie? I know that was just the question. Do we want to put something in there?
I like the point Bjorn made during the meetings we had of like, since like the meetings are like, I mean, this year it's weekly, but you said that it could change like bi-weekly or to like have kind of like how quorum works. You need this certain amount of like a percentage, like 1/3 or 2/3 of like attendees of like the meeting. It'd be weird if like we said you can only miss 3 meetings, but we're like working bi-weekly, or I don't think monthly that would ever happen, but if that could happen, so like saying like 1/3 of the year like you could miss, or yeah. But Judy, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a definition for excused versus unexcused, because if there's something that comes up every week, is that really excused? Because then will we need to, you know what I mean? Like that definition, I feel like would really help clarify.
Yeah, and the definition really is an excused absence is really prior notice. And so a member letting the chair and advisor, so really me and Deanna, know, hey, I'm not going to be able to make the meeting. And it does happen, right? In fact, I think almost everyone on the committee this year has had at least one excused absence throughout the year. It hasn't been a major issue with that, but again, that's where there's a difference between someone saying, I'm not going to be able to make it because something came up. There's other things, either that were planned in advance, knowing you have a presentation or a conference or another meeting, or there's an emergency, a family situation, illness. I mean, those are going to happen. There's a difference between that versus someone just not showing up to the meeting, and we get here and it's like, wow. And I'm just going to pick on, who am I looking at right now? We're going to pick on Sean. Sorry, Sean. It's like, I haven't seen Sean in like 3 months. No one's heard from him. It's like, hey, are you still part of the committee? Yep, I'm still part of it. Great. We can't put anyone in Sean's place because he's still a member. But so that's really where the attendance part comes in. I can tell you right now, in the 9 years I've done this, we've only had really one specific. So I'm sure there's a second. I give myself the benefit of the doubt. So there's probably been 2 situations where that's come up. We've had conversations with members like, hey, if you're not able to make it, and we've had a couple people who have like, no, I need to step away just because I can't commit to it, but only one time that I can actually recall where we had to remove a member, and it wasn't Sean.
Yeah, I mean, what if we made that just at the discretion of the chair? So that way the decision is still in the hands of like a, like a student member. But it's, they can just be like, yeah, they have not been here this entire time, or, you know what I mean? Just leave it up to their discretion.
Well, and just so you all know, if you look under the removal part, it talks in general, but it says a committee member with more than 2 absences may, by a vote of the committee, have their name submitted. And for students, right, that would go up to the dean of students for removal from the committee. It doesn't mean it's an automatic, because I think we all know things happen, right, that could come up on that. So this is really, do we leave it blank as it is, so an excused absence, and say nothing about it, or do we say excused absence, but members who have missed, even with excuse, more than half the meetings for a quarter could be removed, or 2/3 or things, or just leave it where it is? I will tell you, if it really became an issue, we would probably bring it up as a committee regardless, but just for people to be aware.
Yeah, we need a form of discipline to be up in here, I think. So yeah.
I just want to say I asked the question only because I was in ESC, and they Judy may know they track attendance like quarterly, and they do have like mandatory like weekly meetings, and it's been like that for years. So that's the only reason why I brought it up. But I also don't think there's been a problem this year. I think a lot of people have been here attending, and usually I'm including in the emails when somebody can't make it, and they do let us know in advance. So yeah, I don't know about previous years if it's been an issue, but Joey just said that it really hasn't been that much. But I think we could go with how like keeping track by like a certain amount, like if it's like weekly, then you can't miss like more than half or something like that. Or we could go with how Judy said, to discretion of the chairperson.
Yeah, and I will say ESC's their attendance is a little more strict, like you can only miss 2 meetings, that sort of thing. But like definitely like it's a similar sense of sort of like after those 2, it's very there's just kind of a lot that goes on with that attendance, and it qualifies orgs for a lot of different things. So we like to kind of poke and make sure like, hey, are you still coming? And so I think that kind of initiative is good. But if our ruling like for how many you can miss is more lenient, I think we can kind of just leave it up to circumstance to alter the wording, or to just some sort of wording of at the discretion of the chair. Because if it's an excuse thing, and like it's I don't know, I think it's since we can't come up with a generalized enough wording, I think we should just leave it for now.
Great. And then the last one I had on here, and maybe this is for Bjorn to share a little bit more context, and then I can add more, is really that last part under budget proposals on the bottom of page 3. So this is again for base funding primarily, where it talks about committee will accept budget proposals, giving first priority to the obligations referenced. And if you look above in section 2A3, it says funding priorities. They'll evaluate funding requests, prepare the recommendations. All requests, whether new or continue, will be evaluated in accordance with how the funding proposals will benefit students. And so the two pieces that it does detail, and I say detail, it does outline for evaluation, is based on those funding priorities that are listed under section 3, and evaluated based on how they benefit CWU students. We had a couple areas who during public comment shared pieces that they wanted more quantitative evaluations of the funding pieces, and so brought up some concerns of that. And as a subcommittee, we talked about we wouldn't be putting criteria in here or a rubric in the policy, but is there additional wording that you all might want in there about evaluating requests? Beard?
Yeah, it was based upon the calls for more quantitative analysis. One member of PBAC called for a rubric, which would be overly specific to be expressed in the guidelines for sure. But I mean, you've got the funding priorities, you've got the benefit CWU students, you've got the implicit requirement that it fits the S&A like purview, i.e. co-curricular or extracurricular. And you've got extra legal stuff that I don't know about. I just wasn't sure how to make it, whether there was anything else we wanted to put in regarding what S&A evaluates, especially since it's sort of spread out through different documents-ish, kind of, in that the guidelines don't mention anything about like whether it fits the S&A mission, which is implicit because like it's S&A, gotta fit the S&A mission, but I don't know, it seemed like a potential opportunity to be more, you know, I'm trying to stop using the word quantitative, but that.
So any thoughts, feedback, questions?
Aaron.
I guess one of the questions that arose for me from looking at this was, so there's the funding priorities from 2A3, pre-existing contractual obligations, that's already incurred, etc. How do those stack up against the requirement to benefit CWU students that's in 2A4? Because like if something benefits CWU students but is lower on the funding priority, I just don't know if it's we're having metrics clashing or if I'm reading too much into this.
I hate to say this, Bjorn, but you might be reading too much into it, and I'll tell you why. Because if you look at those funding priorities, most of them are things that we would have already put in place, because you're talking pre-existing contractual agreements, debts already incurred, legal obligations, contracts recognized and approved by the committee. So all things that, again, based on what is S&A purpose and funding, should be benefiting students, right? I can't think of an example that wouldn't. And then the other ones you have is specifically the Student Union Recreation Center and the support costs of those, giving the bonded agreement, and then stability for programs affecting students, again, goes directly back to benefiting and affecting students. So I don't think there's a conflict that you would see in any of those. I think it's those are in order priority contractual agreements we have to do, yada, yada, yada. And then it's also evaluating based on the benefit to students.
Lacey.
Yeah, and also just to add on to that, kind of that beginning phrase is it's also listed similar to that in the RCWs. So this policy is just referencing that we are required to pay the bond payments for the building, which you would then argue the building is for the students and so forth. And so I totally kind of, I get your thought process, but I think I would advise to kind of leave that phrase in there because it's pretty specific to like people in my position and like people that are kind of looking at the obligations that we've already put in place for the funding.
Gotcha. That makes sense to me. I can't think of any other qualifiers that need to be added, but I'm also only one person.
And Greg.
I also think, Bjorn, it's important to be in there because as we have leadership changes at the university level, and the perception is how do we utilize the resources that we have? It kind of underscores and protects the student interest in those funds when individuals that may be coming from outside of Washington State that are familiar with different systems that don't have those priorities of shared student governance and the protection of that role and that stewardship. It helps underscore that in a way that kind of protects the students' interest in those resources. Another way to look at it.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems like a good kind of catch-all phrase for the S&A mission.
Any other feedback or thoughts on that, or anything else in here with the proposed updates and edits?
Bjorn.
Yeah, sorry, it's always me. There was one thing that I just remembered that I kind of wanted to talk to Faculty Senate about because I wanted to get their opinion. It was like, since we mentioned the role of faculty as providing that institutional memory, I had floated the rough idea of increasing the term so that they would get to see 2 quadrennial deliberations in their time. But that's also like a big requirement to say, hey, you're here for 5 or 6 years or whatever. So I was kind of interested in floating that to the committee and then potentially to Faculty Senate, see how it was received if we're trying to enhance that long-term memory.
And I know Sean might be busy in the background, so I don't want to put him on the spot, but I will. There he is. His camera's on, so.
Dinner was thrown in front of me, so I was trying to scarf down what I could.
You're good. I just don't want to be like, hey, Sean, and then you're not there. I think the question there would be, and we talked about this as a subcommittee, if that's something as well that does get brought up, that can be an easy update later on. But I think the question would be, if we're looking at, from your perspective, and you're only one faculty member, but I know we're going to make you speak for all of them now. As a faculty member on there, if we do change it to a non-voting piece, I mean, you already mentioned a minute ago, it may be hard pressed to get 3 faculty members to show up weekly or regularly to that without a vote. And then talking about extending the term beyond 4 years into potentially 6 years. Thoughts, responses?
So when a faculty member sees a commitment where it's multiple years, even this one, a lot of faculty members shy away from it because they're like, oh, I don't even know what I'm going to be doing in 4 years or or whatever it might be. So I think that's a legitimate concern. And if you extend it based on, you know, as a non-voting member and asking them to go at least currently weekly, it might be changed, whatever that might be. It's going to be tough to get 3, I think for sure. I think you could get 1 or 2. Some of the diehards, Greg isn't on here, but I know he's really, you know, he's really invested in this, and I have become invested in it after going through the quadrennium, but I think it's going to be difficult to get faculty members that want to do it consistently. I think would be my concern if it's moved to non-voting and a 6-year term. But that's, again, I'm going to say it because even though you're saying I'm speaking for everybody, this is just my opinion. So you'd probably want to go back to Faculty Senate and get their take as well.
Joe.
I'm going to raise my hand because I realize I just keep talking, and I apologize instead of raising my hand and follow appropriate protocol. Let me lower that there. And you know, I think that's a good point. I think the other part that's in there is even with that is it does say that the faculty members serve 4-year terms and may be reappointed. I can tell you, since I have been here, we have not had any faculty who have wanted to serve a second 4-year term. Even with them being involved and invested within that, they have the option to. None of them have. And you could ask each of them why they have not. And you'll probably have multiple different answers, but just for historical perspective.
Sean,
Trying to follow protocol better. So
it's okay.
I think that's a good point. I think one of the things that with the 4-year terms, that would potentially mean 2 quadrenniums, and I think that becomes somewhat potentially draining for faculty members, where there's that, Joey, correct me if I'm wrong, but that meeting that we had that took all Saturday, I can't remember how long it was, but I think that's a tough pill to swallow for faculty members to do twice, plus all the listening meetings and everything. That would be my assumption. But you know, because that is somewhat of a heavy load while you're trying to do everything else. And I'm not, you know, I think what I continue to remind myself is I'm not the same as all faculty, but this is the stuff I hear, right, within my department and my college. So.
And I guess I'll jump in, not with a comment or a question, but since I was presenting this, is there anything else on this? Otherwise, I'll let you know the game plan on my end is I've been taking notes with what you all have said in terms of response to these. I'll go in, not tonight, tomorrow, maybe Friday. By the end of the week, I will go in and make the edits and kind of pieces based on our discussions that we've had tonight. If you have any other additional thoughts or things in there, especially with some of the things we're talking about, specific vocabulary or wording, feel free to send those to me before the end of the week. But I'll update the draft and then we'll send it out to you all so you can see at least the most up-to-date draft for us to review. And then next week would be, the idea would be not that we're going back through everything. If there's any minor tweaks or if I completely missed a point and updated it wrong, call me out on that. Otherwise, it would really be the last bit of discussion and then a motion to adopt the changes next week. So knowing that that's the game plan, again, feel free to send me any additional wording or pieces for us to throw in there, but I'll update it given our discussion. But any last questions, comments? Again, thank you, subcommittee, for all the work the last couple of weeks on this. The conversations we were having tonight, we've had on 3 different occasions with the subcommittee. So appreciate you all as well tonight, spending time going through this.
Does anybody else have any questions to ask? And then I would move on to public comment, right? Okay. I'm seeing no questions, so I'm gonna move on to Okay, so I'm gonna move on to public comment. Does anybody have a public comment to make? See, oh, publicity.
Hi, this is Lola Gallagher. All I wanted to do was compliment you all on such a thoughtful discussion. That was amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Lola. Does anybody have anything else to add? I'm seeing none, so I motion to adjourn this meeting at 6:45.
Entertain a motion.
Oh, I entertain a motion. I keep getting that wrong. I entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting at 6:45.
Motion to adjourn.
Judy motions. Does anybody second? Joffrey seconds. All those in favor? 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. All those not in favor? Abstentions? Motion passes 6-0-0. Thank you everybody for coming, and I thought that was really great discussion we had.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your week and see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.